Okay, hello everyone. Today I will be discussing free will, psychedelics, and their intersections. That's a lot, and I'm not going to be able to do justice to the topics, but I'll try to hit some of what I believe to be the most important points and point to places where there are more extended discussions which I hope people will look into and I would love to discuss. So free will, I have a lot of skin or soul in this game, and that it's part of what got me started in cognitive science. A very long, extended, and frankly scary existential crisis about free will when I was young. Uh, what is it? How could we possibly have it? Clearly, there's not a neuron in my head that knows or cares that I exist, or a particle. How could I be a cause in any meaningful sense? Later, I would come to adopt I guess, either a more multifarious or maybe deflationary account of causation, where basically, much as Sean Carroll has suggested, causal descriptions ought to stay in their lanes. So once you carve up the world into a given ontology, you can do a causal handling, something like Pearl's causal calculus, but you don't switch ontologies mid-explanation. That's like dividing by zero, doesn't parse. In this way, basically, I'm suggesting that for free will, I'm maybe doing something akin to what Anil calls like the real problem of consciousness. I'd call it like the real problem of free will, which is talking about all the different ways in which we do or don't have different capacities, which we would recognize as being important for agency, intentionality, ways that our consciousness, our selfhood, and our values can be meaningful causes and difference makers. So in terms of the works that this talk will draw upon, there's one preprint called On the Degrees of Freedom Worth Having, Psychedelics as Means of Understanding and Expanding Free Will. That's the most recent part of it. And this one, I go a little bit more into the freedom than the will. And the other work, I go more into the will than the freedom. And you're like, well, what's he talking about? I guess with respect to free will, I think sometimes language is wise. And in this case, what seems like a contradiction is actually referring to a kind of dynamic tension between capacities where we value both these capacities and where we want different combinations of them in different circumstances. Specifically, you want will in that you want to be an effective agent who gets the things you want when you're shooting at them. You want to be able to attain your goals, but you also want freedom. You want to be able to break free of the past, change your mind, pivot, sometimes be surprised. How could you want both things? Of course you could want both things. And oftentimes they're very synergistic depending on what goals you are, or conflicting, depending on what goals you are pursuing over which scales. And so there's another preprint on the varieties of conscious experiences, altered beliefs under psychedelics. I won't be able to get too much into the psychedelics today, but for people who are interested, I presented a unified model of psychedelics that I believe encompasses most other proposals. Some of this work also draws upon models of the hippocampal system. I've been working with these two wonderful roboticists, Tim Verbaelen and Ozan Katal, to reverse engineer the hippocampal system as a kind of high-level cybernetic controller, allowing you to navigate your way through various spaces, including and pursuing goals in those spaces, including with respect to things like imaginative planning. And I would call this actually, this relates to some of the varieties of free will worth having and wanting. And finally, there's some other work kind of exploring these ideas in the context of trying to build artificial agents with psychedelic-like machine learning parameters and seeing the ways in which this enhances their capacities to learn and imagine. Won't be able to get into that here, but that's done in collaboration with Zara Shikbahi. And finally, it draws upon a theory of consciousness that I call integrated world modeling theory, where I've tried to synergistically bring together some of the other theories within the free energy principle and active inference framework as a kind of overarching perspective, basically cross-referencing across different theories, looking for points of overlap and difference, trying to learn from all of them, noting the similarities and the differences, trying to honor them both. And For all this, I will be drawing upon a distinction between phenomenal consciousness and conscious access as different things. So specifically with phenomenal consciousness, I will be talking experience, what it is like, or subjectivity, to have a point of view on a lived world, and conscious access being your awareness of those experiences, your knowledge of them, your ability to manipulate and report on them. And I bring this up because in terms of both the mechanisms I'm proposing, they will relate to these distinctions being kept separate, both a stream of experience or iterative system world estimates, or qualia, if you will, organized into a stream of experience, either for perception or imagination or memory, but that being separate from your ability to be aware of these experiences and having different types of knowledge about them. This is important for both psychedelic phenomenology and for free will, because meta-awareness expands your degrees of freedom in very important ways. Very briefly, integrated world modeling theory, I will basically bring it focuses on integrated information theory and the global neural workspace theory, arguing that they both can be considered to be largely compatible if you consider IIT to be talking about phenomenality and GNWT to be talking about conscious access. If in theory they're talking about somewhat different things, some of their arguments might be overstated. And in theory, you could bring them together to create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, as I've attempted to do. And this is important because if we're going to talk about free will, one of the varieties of free will we most want is for the sense in which our consciousness is a cause of what happens. And so this is going to require us to have some understanding of what the heck consciousness might be. Very much in very broad brushstrokes, the idea would be that your perception and your conscious experience is a kind of waking dream or grounded hallucination, your inference to the best guess as to what either is going on or could be going on under under counterfactual circumstances. We might call that imagination or memory. And when it's actually being informed by the world as part of an ongoing coupling, we might call that perception proper. Also in very broad brushstrokes, the idea would be looking to machine learning and probability theory to provide a source of bridging principles between biophysics and mind. On your left, you see a good old-fashioned discriminative model that's good for telling you, given a stimulus, what type of stimulus it might be. But once you've trained up such a network, you can invert it and use it to generate likely patterns of likely patterns of data given its history of experience. And right here, you would see this sort of inversion process creating different faces, or I guess you could call them faces that have never existed. And the idea is that instead of filling in a pixel array of faces, if what you're filling in is your different modalities and different combinations, something like this might be a stream of experience with many devils and many details, but that's the general shape of it. In what follows, I will be drawing upon some, so for the devils in those details, I go into them some in integrated world modeling theory, talking about which principles for machine learning might be important for realizing this type of generative processes and how the brain might do it, specifically talking about variational autoencoders with synchronous activity along them, and the ways in which they could be combined to give you a multimodal lived world. So finally, to bring it all together, the most complete description would be in a paper called The Radically Embodied Conscious Cybernetic Bayesian Brain, From Free Energy to Free Will and Back Again. And this one I try to describe basically both developmentally and mechanistically, how is it that different capacities for agency are acquired over the course of development, and how these might be reflected in the brain's architecture. For all of this, I'll using I call it a Marian neurophenomenological approach, or Anil Seth calls it a computational neurophenomenological approach, which I think is a better name. But by Marian, the idea is you can understand any aspects of cognition at these three compatible and potential levels: a computational functional level, what a system does; a implementation level, the physical way in which it's realized; and between them an algorithmic level or an abstract description of those implementations and how they realize those functions. So the idea being that to do satisfying handling of any aspect of experience and to basically bring consciousness back into cognitive science, you want to basically, top right here, you want to take phenomenology seriously, identifying core aspects of experience, including your agency amongst them, and your different forms of agency or lack thereof. And then you want to have you want connections between this rich account of phenomenology with this full stack Marian handling of how does it play out on computational, algorithmic, and implementation, with each one mutually constraining the other as a kind of crossword puzzle where each one's helping you to provide constraints on the other. So, but throughout all of this, the idea is that the brain is a cybernetic control system for an embodied, for an agent with a body. Brains are embodied for agents who are embedded in a world with which they interact and pursue valued goals. And so it's a control architecture. Don't worry about this slide. So, okay, so we're about ready to dive into free will. But I wanted to give some background on basically where I'm coming from with this. But and from this, you'll see me be using these comics. I call them modal frame sequences because I'm somewhat embarrassed of saying comics, even though I shouldn't, because I think they are an extremely rich medium, and we should actually really take note of how evocative and rich of a medium they are for capturing elements of experience. If I cannot make a comic of something, an aspect of the mind, I do not understand it. I'm not saying I do if I can make a comic, but I definitely don't understand if I can't make a comic. And so the idea would be taking different aspects of experience and basically depicting frame, what is it like? And so in this radically embodied conscious cybernetic Bayesian brain paper, and throughout all these, actually, I'll be using these modal frame sequences to describe examples of goal-oriented behavior. So here there's a person sitting at their computer wanting tea, and then basically by doing this sort of iterative contrasting between sensed and imagined states, and then finding ways of minimizing the difference between basically what you're imagining, this thing you want but don't have, and where you're at and where you think you'll be at next, and then finding the differences as you're iteratively contrasting, that this is basically describing the unfolding of a stream of sensing and imagining that allows you to pursue valued goals in the world. And so at the highest level of organization, and this is relevant, the work from with the roboticists I mentioned is relevant here. The idea would be that the hippocampal system would be basically the closest thing to agentic control in terms of, you might call it the highest level, or the most integrative level of control. Some would argue that like the body and interoception is actually a higher level and more integrative. But in terms of like integrative in the sense of very closely coupling to your sense of self and agency and the moment-to-moment unfoldings of your consciousness, it might be that the hippocampal system is the most concentrated difference maker. And what it will be doing is basically, Damasio calls it a convergence-divergence zone. It's generally understood as the top of the cortical hierarchy. Everything sort of funnels into it, and that's not predicted elsewhere in the brain. And the new information gets stored as a series of pointers to and from the hippocampus. And the hippocampus basically is a sequence memory that will be able to play out and orchestrate these transitions. So you can basically use this to record what is the overall state from as the organism moved through space and time. What were the different states? And you can use this for a basis of either episodic memory or episodic imaginings if you basically have the hippocampus play out different trajectories, and then use this to basically parameterize or shape the brain, doing a kind of confabulative filling in of likely sense states. And we would then call that imagining and maybe remembering. And so, yeah, so there's some modal frame sequences trying to get into the different aspects of phenomenology that would correspond to what it would feel like or be like to be the functioning of such an architecture. And so as you're, stepping through experience, these different system world estimates, here you are contrasting, I'm imagining the tea, but I do not currently have it. And then you're imagine yourself getting up and there's feelings of urge and there's a lived body. And this is the kind of details we're going to want if we're going to talk about something like meaningful degrees of freedom. And so what I then do is I apply this to basically the Lebesgue paradigm. And so for anyone who doesn't know, this is this famed experiment or infamous experiment that supposedly shows that we don't have free will. Basically, you are made to generate an action whenever you feel like it. I will press this button. And you're looking at a clock, and it's a big clock with a thing moving around the edge. And the reason it's big is so you can do fine-grained time estimates at tens and hundreds of milliseconds level of granularity. And so as it's moving, the person will say, that was the moment in which I decided to press the button. That's when I felt the feeling of urge. And I said, yeah, that's when I'm going to do it. But what people have noticed is you'll get this ramping activity that will happen before the person notes. And so since causes are thought to precede effects, how can your feeling of urge or decision be a meaningful difference maker if it's coming too late to the game? There's some problems with this in that, well, one, this is based on ERPs or event-related potentials, which requires averaging over multiple trials. And just because you have predictive information doesn't mean you have determination. But still, let's just grant even that like the readiness potential, there's a lot of complexities. We shouldn't grant this, but let's grant that it's always an indication of a causal unfolding, and that's the thing that's going to move you. I would suggest that even in this case of this Lebesgue paradigm, your consciousness is still entering into the causal stream in meaningful ways. More specifically, if we go upstream of this ramping, or what is this ramping of activity, the idea is that basically a kind of, I suggest, hippocampally orchestrated imaginative planning of rolling out of different possibilities, seeing how you feel, going down different trajectories of imaginings, feeling different things, and then going down different parts of these decision trees or imagination or streams of experienced imagining. So, I'm thinking with respect to, here, this is, will I make tea or not? And this is, you're imagining yourself going through and you're deciding to stand. But for the Lebesgue paradigm, will I press the button or not? So will I, won't I, will I, won't I? And then you have this like micro imagining, and then it feels a given way. And then you imagine it, will I, won't I? And then it feels a given way. And then you can map this onto the neural substrates that would contribute to this. And so you would have, you could describe this in terms of the buildup of recurrent or reentrant activity in action-oriented body maps in the frontal parietal system. That would be something like the motor preparation and the imaginings. The devil's in details, and the feeling of urge might be something like crosstalk with the insular hierarchy, receiving interoceptive information. So here I am feeling things, imagining things, feeling things, imagining things, and I am conscious of them as they're happening. I don't just I don't just press the button out of nowhere and I'm a blank screen before there's the mind try to press the button in a Lebesgue experiment. I'm thinking, will I, won't I, will I, won't I? That's my consciousness entering the causal stream, and the suggestion is that ramping is reflecting this preparatory activity. And so that would be in a nutshell my deflation of deflationary accounts of free will from the Lebesgue paradigm. You can understand this in other terms. I've described this in terms of the free energy principle and active inference framework as basically an accumulation of model evidence leading to an action. I won't have time to get into that here. Oh, by the way, how much time do I have?
You've got 6 minutes in total, but we'd love to have some questions at the end, if possible.
Okay, so I will blow through the rest. Okay, so basically, to bring psychedelics into the mix, we're going to have to talk about how they might work in the brain. You'll want to read the Albus manuscript for that, but basically I take the existing model of Rebus, suggest it gets things precisely backwards with respect to basically what you would expect for the functioning of the system upon which psychedelic acts under most circumstances. However, there might be cases where you do get this sort of relaxation of your beliefs, and describe the ways in which this would potentially impact the mechanisms of your agency and your phenomenology and how this might play out. The reason I think this is relevant, so then basically I take this Lebesgue paradigm, and this is a experiment I have planned. I'm about to get that started in a few months to actually rerun the Libet experiment with psychedelics. And interpreting it as basically, rather than just showing you do or don't have free will, showing ways in which you do or don't have agentic control and awareness of the processes that lead into it. And so I have this schematic here describing the preprint of how under different doses of psychedelics, you might expect different regimes of experience and sense making, contributing to different modes of action selection and different varieties of agency. And I will end here and take questions if you would like to go there.